I want to consider this subject, the power of God, under two headings. First one, very brief. Consider the scope of the power of God. And then under the second heading, the use of the power of God. So let's start by considering the scope. And we have an illustration there of the stars in the sky. And in Genesis we read, "And God made the two great lights, and the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and he made the stars." So we see the power of God controlling the universe. But then if we drill down a little bit, and we come to the planet Earth, and again in Genesis we read, "And God said, Let the waters and the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so." God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called sea. And God saw that it was good. So everything that God created, we're told, was very good. And perhaps I should say that the quotations this afternoon, are taken from the English Standard Version. But let's go down a little bit further. If you haven't spotted it, that's a Google Earth picture of the Stafford meeting room. And our quotation takes it down a little bit further. It's taken from Acts chapter 15, where we have the conference at Jerusalem. And we read, "After there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, 'Brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. He made no distinction between us and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith.'" So God sees into the hearts of man as well. But let's go down a little bit further. Quoting from Matthew chapter 10. "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But even the hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows." So, considering the scope of the power of God, we see him interested in the whole universe, down to things that are very small and very, in our eyes, insignificant. He has control and power over them. So now I'm going to go on to the second section, which is obviously going to take the bigger section. The use of the power. And the first illustration I'm going to put on the screen might surprise you. It's an incident that happened and was recorded in the papers. It was on the headline news for a day or two. I think it was about June last year. An incident in Malaysia. A British woman has been arrested for stripping naked on a sacred Malaysian mountain, which locals caused one of the country's deadliest earthquakes. Well, what relevance has that got to do with the Bible? Well, we have an example of a stupid British woman, and she got her just desserts. But it was the next bit that was of more interest to me. At least 16 people died on Friday when a 5.9 magnitude quake rocked the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Indigenous Malaysians blamed the natural disaster that killed 16 on 10 Westerners who stripped off on Mount Kinabalu in Malaysia. Furious indigenous people in the city of Sabah claimed they angered the spirit of the mountain after the picture went viral on Facebook and WhatsApp. Lawmakers suggest they should be brought before their native court to restore the balance and appease the mountain spirits. I don't know how many of you saw that incident in the papers. When I first read that and sort of the local people blaming these 10 people who'd stripped off on the mountain for upsetting the gods. I thought, what a load of rubbish. But then I stopped and thought about it. But the God I believe in has the power to bring that sort of judgment about. Let's have a look at Scripture and see what at a few examples. Here we go to Genesis chapter 18. And here we're looking at we went there this morning, the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis chapter 18, and we're going at verse 16. This is picking up the story where angels came and Abraham took them into his home and fed them. And the time came for them to leave. Then the men set out from there and they looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether, according to the outcry, what has come to me. And if not, I will know." So God was hearing the goings on in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was sending his angels to find out what was happening and to prove right or wrong the news, the reports that he was getting. And so chapter 19, the two angels, having departed from Abraham, came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting there in the gate. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and bowed himself with his face to the earth, and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people, to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them." They didn't need much further evidence as to what was happening in the city. It was very clear by the fact that they surrounded the house and they wanted them to come out. And so in the morning, verse 24, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulphur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. So God sent sulphur and fire to destroy the cities. I can only imagine it to be like a volcano erupting and the molten lava coming down onto a city. Is how the only way I can envisage that. So we see that when God sees an issue that requires destroying, the God that we believe in has the power to destroy it. Just as the people in Malaysia believed that it was the spirits of the mountains. Okay, let's think of another instance, a different sort of instance. Let's think of the time of Joshua. Joshua chapter 10. This is after the children of Israel have gone into the promised land. Chapter 9 records the occasion where the Gibeonites come to Joshua and say, we've come from a far country, make a league with us. And then he finds out that they're actually a neighbouring city. But they were frightened by what the children of Israel were doing and how they had conquered Jericho and Ai. And they obviously knew that the God of Israel could do terrible things and was going to go through the land and take it. But having made this agreement with the children of Israel, the Gibeonites had upset their neighbours, who decided to come against them. And in chapter 10 we have the record. And because of the agreement that they'd made, then it was up to the children of Israel to go and save the Gibeonites. And so starting in verse 7 we have the record of Joshua doing exactly that. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. So we see there is a hint that God is with Joshua and he's going to bring the victory. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. And there were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. So there's one instance how God gave victory to the children of Israel by use of hailstones. And then on the illustration you see hailstones the size of what? Golf balls? And you can well imagine if they had fallen a distance and hit you, they would do some damage. But there's another illustration here as well as to how God also gave victory to the children of Israel. Reading on in verse 12. At that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nations took vengeance on their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Joshua? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven, and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So we're thinking of the power of God. And we've seen recorded in a short passage in Joshua, it is God who was doing the fighting on their behalf. So let's take another different sort of event. Let's go to Daniel chapter 4, to the record of Nebuchadnezzar. Again, Nebuchadnezzar is clearly demonstrating how it is God that is in charge. And this is Nebuchadnezzar recalling the events sometime after it had all taken place. So probably at least 8 years after he had his dream. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Nebuchadnezzar is showing to the people the experience he has had at the hand of God. Nebuchadnezzar now recognised God. So he explains in verses 4 to 9 the dream that he had, and the usual interpreters tried to understand it, but it was only Daniel who could reveal the meaning. Verse 9, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Nebuchadnezzar knew that through the work of God, Daniel was able to provide the interpretation of the dream. But that's the only reason Daniel could reveal the interpretation. The dream is told to Daniel of how he saw this big tree and how it was cut down, leaving a stump in the ground. Verse 17. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, till the end that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomsoever he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. So the whole purpose of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had was to show that it was God that was in charge. So Daniel interprets the dream and shows how that if Nebuchadnezzar fails to put his trust in God, then he'll be driven out of his palace and he'll live as a wild animal for 7 years. And with such a powerful king, it was with some fear and trepidation that Daniel gave him the interpretation of it. As Daniel exhorted Nebuchadnezzar to mend your ways. Turn to God now while you can. But it made no difference. Verse 28. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace. And the king answered and said, Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty powers, a royal residence, for the glory of the majesty? While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. And for a time, for 7 years, the kingdom was taken away from Nebuchadnezzar. But then at the end of it, verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honoured him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say to him, What have you done? So Nebuchadnezzar finally recognised God. But not only was his kingdom restored to him, verse 36, halfway through, my counsellors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. So he was a greater king afterwards, again showing the power of God. God is able to give to whom he wishes and take away from whom he wishes. Verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol the honour of the King of heaven. For all his works are right and his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. The power of God. Able to humble the powerful or build up the weak. Nebuchadnezzar had a painful lesson to learn, but he learnt it. And at the end of it, he told the world about it, praising God. But what about one of Nebuchadnezzar's other dreams? Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, quite familiar to us. Verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. But Nebuchadnezzar refused to tell them what the dream was. He said, if you're up to your job, you'll tell me. And it's only when Daniel came to him, he said, through the hand of God. Daniel chapter 2, verse 28. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. The image that you saw is made up of 4 metals. And as we can see on the illustration on the screen, the head of gold, the arms and breast of silver, the thighs of brass, and the legs of iron. And Daniel gives him the interpretation. Verse 37. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory, and into whose hand he is given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar that he's this head, the very rich kingdom of Babylon. But then he also goes on and explains further. Verse 39. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Second and third kingdoms. Well, the second kingdom were the Medes and the Persians, which reigned from BC 536 to 334. Then the Greeks came, who reigned from 334 to BC 67. Verse 40. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. The fourth kingdom, that of the Roman Empire, which was very strong. Verse 41. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they shall mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. This eventually becomes fragmented, as illustrated by the feet of iron and clay. The image is destroyed by a stone that grows into a great mountain. Verse 44. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So we know that through the power of God, there is to be yet another kingdom. But that's one we are still waiting for. A time when Jesus will return to establish it. But we only have 4 empires described there. 4 empires because these are the empires that ruled over Israel. History tells us how in AD 70 the temple was destroyed and the temple worship ceased. Then in AD 135 the Jews were moved from the land of Israel, scattered throughout the world, and the nation of Israel ceased to exist. Why did they cease to exist? Because of their godlessness. Because they could not or would not listen to God and seek to do His will. So they were punished. They were spread throughout the world. But we shouldn't be surprised about it. Because if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, a chapter which explains the blessings that were available to the children of Israel if they were obedient. That's the first 14 verses, the first 20% of the chapter. The other 80% of the chapter is the curses, telling them what will happen if they don't obey. And Deuteronomy 28 and verse 64, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other. And there you will serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. And among these nations you shall find no respite, and there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart, of failing eyes, and a languishing soul. Your life will hang in doubt before you. Night and day you shall be in dread, and have no assurance of your life. In the morning you shall say, if only it were evening. And at evening you shall say, if only it were morning. Because of the dread of your heart shall feel, and the sights of your eyes shall see. And Jesus, writing in Luke in his ministry, tells how the Jews will be led away captive into many nations. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. Alas for women who are pregnant, for those who are nursing infants in those days. For there will be a great distress upon the earth, and wrath against this people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, and be led captive among all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. A strange nation, Israel. Out of their land for 1900 years. Scattered throughout the world. But they never lost their identity. A Jew can still demonstrate that they are a Jew all through the generations. But at the end of that verse 24, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. God had every intention of regathering them. And in Jeremiah, he prophesies that the Jews would be regathered. For I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee, though I make a full end of all nations, whither I have scattered thee. Yet will I make a full end of thee. Will I not make a full end of thee? But I will correct thee in measure, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished. So Jeremiah was clearly prophesying that they would be regathered. And in Micah we read, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted above the hills, and people shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up into the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us of his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So one day, Jerusalem will be the capital of the world, and all nations will look to Israel as God's chosen nation, looking to Jesus as the King. When will that be? We don't know. Because even when the disciples asked Jesus, just before he ascended to be beside his Father, Acts chapter 1, so when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. So Jesus didn't know, we don't know, but we are certainly looking for the return of Jesus. And we know it's getting close. 1948 saw the re-establishment of the nation of Israel in their homeland, with Israel and Jerusalem at the capital. History demonstrates the accuracy of the Bible and that God is in control. The Bible demonstrates the power of God. Thank you.